Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. And I'm going to just open up right away with a scripture from Isaiah 10. And here it is, Isaiah 10, verse 1. It says, "Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that write grievousness which they have prescribed." Why am I showing you this scripture? Well, as you can see, Isaiah is suggesting strongly here that when we have unrighteous mandates or unrighteous laws or policies, it creates grievousness, and it usually hits the folks who are, well, quite frankly, in lesser powered positions. And so therefore, I'm going to introduce you to Bill C-367. So let me show you what this bill says. Here it is, Bill 367. My apologies, I clicked on the wrong one there. And essentially, folks, it's Bill C-367. This is for Canada. It's an act to amend the criminal code, all right? And the idea is the promotion of hatred and anti-Semitism, right? So just a little background. According to my understanding, back in around 2003, they had this kind of hate speech law, and they put it into the criminal code. And some folks were up in arms about it because they were concerned about freedom of speech, right? And what they had done was they put a provision in the criminal code that basically said, look, if you still have, it's a religious exemption, for example, okay? Well, fast forward about 20 years, guess what they want to do? They want to remove that exemption. So let's read the summary of this amendment. This enactment, right here, it's at summary point here, this enactment amends the criminal code to eliminate as a defense against willful promotion of hatred or anti-Semitism the fact that a person in good faith expressed or attempted to establish by an argument an opinion on a religious subject or an opinion based on a belief in a religious text. So this would include any religious text, which obviously would include the Holy Bible, right? But any religious text that might speak against certain behaviors, right? And they want to remove this exemption because folks could, for example, speak against certain groups that behave certain ways that they don't really care for. And you can use your religious text and say, well, according to my faith, according to this text, this religious text that I have here, according to scripture, for example, these types of behaviors are inappropriate, not good for society, and should not be promoted in any shape, way, or form, right? Well, you had a religious exemption and they could not call that hate speech. Well, this amendment is suggesting strongly that you would lose that exemption. And therefore, if you did speak that truth out of the Holy Writ, you might be up for a criminal charge. All right. So please understand that this had a first reading and it didn't pass. Okay. So I'm just trying to be clear here, but it did pass the first reading. This is a Canadian amendment. And I would suggest strongly this affects everyone's freedom of speech. So let me take you to the gentleman who introduced this. And this is the gentleman here. I'm not sure how to exactly pronounce his name, but I'll give it my best shot. Yves François Blanchet. All right. And he said this best as I could tell. Right. So let me click on this. He said, "Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that a modern parliament worthy of its name needs to address certain things that we are long overdue in addressing, things that perhaps never should have been in the first place." So again, this goes back to the religious exemption, if you will, right? That you could use, well, this is my faith, so I'm allowed to say that this is inappropriate. He's basically saying it should have never been there in the first place, right? And this is like my good brother Dom. They always like to play the long game, right? They slip it in. They put in something, they put the exemption, and then 20 years later, they try to remove the exemption, right? It's that slippery slope thing, folks. There is a cost, according to Mr. Blanchet, to living together and to living in harmony in society. I find this interesting wording because, but the cost would be on both sides of the pendulum, but not according to Mr. Blanchet. That cost may simply be to refrain from giving inappropriate and undue privileges. And I really want you to watch the difference, folks, okay? There's rights and there's privileges. Your religious freedom is not a privilege. And this is part of what has been going on, since 2020 with the, jabby stabbies and stuff like that, medical privacy issues, informed consent. It's all about taking what are absolute rights okay, God-given rights, and trying to twist them into, well, they're privileges. And because if they're privileges, I get to take your privileges away. You see? So he's already using the wording when he's speaking in Parliament that these are not, it's not your right to have this freedom of speech based on your faith, right? Because he's violating both freedom of speech and violating your religious freedom. And he's calling them privileges now. He's already, with his language, with these words, lowering the status of your religious freedoms and your freedom of speech to privilege rather than human right, God-given human right. So these undue privileges to people within a society who use them to disturb the peace and harmony, especially if those privileges, he keeps using that term, enable people to sow hatred or wish death upon others based on a belief in some divine power. You see? He's stretching these words. He's taking rights, making them into privileges. And then he's kind of giving a picture in, people who believe in divine powers that, we go around apparently wishing death upon people. Oh, no, actually, it's quite the opposite. We want people to live and to live in a lovely way. And we indeed, according to our faith, and quite frankly, history shows that when you operate according to, let's say, Scripture, 1 Timothy, for example, and Titus, people are blessed by it. But we'll continue here. He says, that is even more true in a country that claims to be secular. Well, wait a minute. Who says we're secular? I never said we're secular. Apparently, Mr. Blanchette wants to speak for the entire country in one swoop here and say we're secular. Well, and what's wrong with being secular and faithful to your faith? After all, are we not supposed to be, living together and living in harmony? So we'll continue. That is even more true in a country that claims to be secular or that claims that there is a separation between church and state. Indeed, there is. So why don't you stay out of my church? See, it's not the church invading the state when you make amendments like this. This is the state trying to remove our God-given rights. And by the way, according to my Canadian Bill of Rights, they're mine. They're not privileges, and they're not up for your debate, Mr. Blanchette, right? That is why, according to him, it is high time that someone took action. Action to what? Well, has there been a problem? If you don't want to hear what we have to say, right, in a church setting, whether that's in a Sunday building or quite frankly on a video, then don't click on it. Then don't watch it, right? No. See, no, this is not about making sure that there's equality, that you get to say what you want and I get to say what I want. This is all about we get to say what we want and you don't get to say what you want. Because what you want to say, we find offensive. Well, quite frankly, I find what you guys say quite offensive. But you want to know what I do? I just click and I move on. Very simple. But see what they're trying to do here. Understand that they're trying to take away freedom of speech and freedom of faith to the majority of the public. That's the real purpose behind amendments like this. So you never feel confident. Okay, because let's face it, folks, a good solid portion of the population does not agree with a lot of these movements that are out there, okay? And we should be allowed, certainly, to be able to express that. But if you remove the freedom of speech and freedom of faith from people, what are you doing? You're stripping their rights, and then we can take over and we can put a bunch of nooses around your neck. So understand the purpose behind the amendment. I would ask the House to quickly support the act to amend the criminal code throughout the process in order to prevent the promotion of hatred and anti-Semitism. And by the way, I find this funny because why is this one being cited out specifically? Are there not other minority groups, right? So I'm going to suggest there's something behind that, but I'll leave that where it's at. So now, this is BC Humanist Association, okay? New bill will end religious exemptions to hate speech laws. So they're admitting, right, that up until now, they've got the hate speech laws in place, but there was religious exemptions. So if you have a faith, Christianity, there's other faith bases that are against certain types of lifestyles, and they want to be able to preach and teach accordingly. Well, these folks are saying, no, we need to end that exemption. Well, wouldn't that be creating a situation where now I don't have freedom of speech nor freedom of religion? The answer is absolutely. But they're going to base this on the idea, well, we're humanists. Well, okay, you're a humanist. Well, I'm a human that happens to be a theist, if you will, right? A Christian theist. I believe in what? God, right? So here we go. Let's take a good look here at some of the wording here so that you understand that some folks are really into this, right? And why would they want that? Well, for their agenda, of course. It's always they're gonna always try to make it sound like it's equality when actually what they're doing is making themselves have a better scenario and you don't, okay? New bill would end the religious exemptions to hate speech laws. Bill C-367, tabled Tuesday, would eliminate religious exemptions from Canada's hate speech laws. As humanists, as if we're not humans. Like, I'm not really sure what you're going with that there, but we stand behind efforts that remove religious, and they're using the same language, privileges. No, it's not religious privileges. It's religious rights. Do you see how they're using the same language? I hope you're catching on to the agenda. And then they turn around and say, and promote equality. Well, wait a minute. Look at this two-sided, double-tongued statement here. You're removing religious privileges, which really is removing religious rights, as well as freedom of speech, and that promotes equality? How is that equality? Why? Are you suggesting that a humanist doesn't have a belief system? Yes, you do. Your religion is humanism. That's what your religion is. Okay, you don't believe in a higher power. You don't believe in God. Therefore, you don't believe in, let's say, ancient texts in any shape, way, or form. So what do you believe in? You still believe in something. You believe in humanism. That's what you believe. So you're not trying to promote equality. What you're trying to do is make it so that you get to have your belief system and I don't get to say anything against it, so that your system of belief can become more and more empowered, right? And other people's religious beliefs and thoughts and ideas and speech can be muted, and you can do it, quote unquote, legally. But I'm going to show you once again what Isaiah said. Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that write grievousness, which they have prescribed. They're prescribing this for their gain, and quite frankly, for your loss. And this includes people who are agnostic, because you don't know you're going to be agnostic forever. You might change your mind. This is even for atheists. You might change your mind, right? And you might want to hear other people's points of view when it comes to their faiths or why they believe what they believe, right? So, and you might want to share yours, because who's to say at some point that someone who's agnostic or atheist but still doesn't like something, then they can turn around and say, hey, what you just said offends me, and therefore you can't say that. Or, hey, your belief system offends me, right? So if you want equality, then everybody has to have that freedom of speech. Okay, including the humanists. But I'm not excluding the humanists. They're trying to exclude the religious believers, the faith believers, the people who believe in God or any kind of higher power. Okay? So he continues here in this article and says, religious exemptions to hate speech laws have long been a contentious issue. Not really. They were put in there because by making a hate speech law, you could easily violate freedom of speech and freedom of religion. It's very, very clear, actually. And by the way, what would that do for your freedom of assembly and the right to protest? Think about that. Allowing some to shield themselves behind the cloak of faith. Cloak, if it's out of a religious text that's been preached upon for decades and centuries, how is that a cloak? It's an obvious thing called the Holy Bible. And for maybe Muslims, it might be the Quran. But either way, these are not cloaks of faith. This is a belief system that's been around for centuries upon centuries. While promoting harmful ideologies that perpetuate discrimination and intolerance. Well, I would suggest removing religious privileges, as you're putting it, is what actually does that, okay? Because you're discriminating against my right and other people's rights to be able to speak what they believe is true, whether it's from a religious position, a theist position, it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, I want to be able to say what I think is appropriate and inappropriate according to lifestyles, right? We'll continue here. So So Bill 367 aims to address this loophole. Isn't that interesting now? See what they do? They put it in there because they know it would violate other freedoms and rights. And now they call it a loophole. See the language? It wasn't a loophole. It was they created a law, but of course we have other laws and freedoms, which are cited in the Canadian Bill of Rights, right? And I have religious freedom and speech, and so do you if you live in Canada. That's legal. It's the law, right? It's a true statute, okay? And it was signed across the board by every province and got royal assent, all right? So it's not a loophole that was put in there. It was you were putting something into law and you had to make sure that it didn't infringe upon those other longstanding laws, okay? But look at the wording they use. So pay attention. This is manipulative language here, reinforcing the principle that all Canadians must be held accountable for promoting hate speech, regardless of religious affiliation. So basically, they're basically saying, look, if you have a religious belief, no, you can't say it. And, you can believe it in silence if you want. That's about it. But be careful. We might send the thought police too. All right. So as you can see, of course, they're always going to pick certain hot topics. It says this bill comes at a crucial time as we are witnessing a surge in violence and hatred against this group right here. You know what, folks? Sorry, that's a bold-faced lie. That's just a lie. They have an entire street in my area, okay? And I can't stop them from painting those funky colors all over the place, all right? So that's just a bold-faced lie, and that's just to basically gain people's sympathy, and it's just lies. It's that simple. And if anything, I would suggest that some other people are kind of going, hey, I wasn't expecting this type of behavior around my family or in schools or in public, okay? As well as racial and religious minorities. And that for me is just absolute irony right here. So they're saying this bill comes at a crucial time as we are witnessing a surge in violence towards what? Religious minorities. Wait a minute. You just said, what religious minorities are you speaking of? Maybe are you talking about your religion, the humanist religion? Are you talking about all those little movements you guys have and you're calling yourselves minority religious movements? Is that what you're talking about? So that you can gain an edge and you guys get to say and believe and do whatever you want, but no one can say the opposite? No one can argue back the opposite from their belief system or from their speech or from their religious texts? Interesting. Religion should no longer be an excuse for such virulent bigotry. Okay. So again, we have a situation here where I'm going, what are you talking about? Right. But again, they just say it. People believe it. The BC Humanist Association believes in the importance of creating an inclusive and tolerant society. Yeah, but you're not tolerating us though. You see the hypocrisy in this? That respects the dignity and rights of every individual. Well, not mine. The Canadian Bill of Rights respects the rights of every individual. And I get to speak as a Canadian citizen and believe and express those beliefs because I'm an individual in this country and I get to express those. But you're trying to remove that positioning, right? By putting in another law, which you put in 2003, which then protected those other civil liberties. And now you're trying to remove those protections so that I lose those civil liberties, which you are now calling privileges. See? By supporting this bill, we aim to contribute to the ongoing efforts to build a nation where freedom of expression coexists. No, it doesn't coexist if you eliminate my ability to have my freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is what you're trying to remove. That's very clear. But so what you're saying is you want your freedom of expression and it should exist, and my freedom of expression will not be existing at all. Okay, that's what's really going on here. It's an amazing thing how these people can just lie to you with their double-tongued spiel. But we'll continue here. It says, with the responsibility to protect citizens from the harmful consequences of hate speech. Well, you already have that law in place. Okay, so there's no harmful consequences. You already have the hate speech law. It just has the exemptions that are appropriate so people can maintain their freedom of speech and their freedom of religion. And I apologize for repeating that, but I need you to understand these are rights, not privileges. And those provisions of, what they're calling exemptions to the hate speech law were there to protect those other civil liberties, which you have had since the day you were born. Okay. And they're trying to remove them. It's very, very simple. We encourage all supporters and fellow humanists to take action. Well, I'm going to suggest anybody who believes in freedom of speech and freedom of faith, and quite frankly, freedom of assembly, you need to contact your parliament member today and urge them to support saying no to this nonsense, okay? Because that's what this is, all right? And I'm going to just remind everybody one more time. Listen, guys, it's woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees. So if you can fully understand that, I think what we're trying to do is stop people like Mr. Blanchette from doing this because it's inappropriate. Okay? And so I'm just going to briefly mention, because that's part of the reason why I did that interview with Kimberly, because there was unrighteous policies and mandates being placed, in the last few years, and she has had and has a disability. And those unrighteous policies created a situation where they were ignoring her condition and they were ignoring her situation. And ultimately, it created unrighteous behavior. Someone who's a single female who has a disability, and they were trying to force her to, walk extreme distances when she already has difficulty walking. And then they became very vile, and then they put her through, years of, nonsense. And that's who suffers when there's unrighteous decrees made. And if we as believers especially, but even as Canadian citizens, if we care about do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, then we have to start recognizing that inappropriate mandates and inappropriate policies and unrighteous decrees and laws harm citizens. And generally speaking, it usually harms those who have less power. It harms those who are already weaker in some shape, way, or form. So we have a calling upon us as Canadian citizens, and a little bonus track there for if you happen to be people who believe in God, then you believe in loving your neighbor as yourself. And when you create laws like this or remove the proper rights from people across the board, it creates a scenario where people who are in very, very modest positions and humble positions can be abused and picked on, and it's inappropriate. And they're trying to play this off as this is a benefit to Canadian citizens, but rather it's going to harm Canadian citizens, and especially those who are in more humbled positions. So I'm going to suggest, and by the way, if you get an opportunity, check out that interview I did with Kimberly, and her story was there. And it was those very unrighteous policies that caused so much grief for her that, in my opinion, was unnecessary and inappropriate. And I'm going to say it again. Unrighteous decrees creates unrighteous behavior and ultimately unrighteous people. So share this, by the way, with everyone you know. Let them know and tell them to message their MPs and their representatives and say, hey, we want our freedom of speech. Stop it with this nonsense. We want people to have freedom of faith. That's been a long-standing right, and it should not be messed with in any shape, way, or form. And if you happen to be part of any kind of congregation, you might be concerned for your pastors, your elders, the deacons and deaconesses, and the bishops and the bishopesses, right? You're all going to be, all Canadian citizens can be affected by this, but anybody, especially that has any kind of religious faith base, you might want to let them know about this. And if you don't mind me saying this, it might be something that they might want to get together and start talking about, because they might want to talk about how they might, want to deal with this. Because again, folks, this is, I call it kind of a double, maybe even a triple-edged sword, because I think I can't see how it won't affect your freedom of speech. And that's everybody. Your freedom of faith, I suggest, does affect everybody, because freedom of religion also means freedom from religion. So you get to believe, you get to not believe, you get to say what you believe, whether it's this way or that way. And then, of course, the freedom of assembly, which, of course, if any of you were around in 2022 and for some of the, the convoy stuff, you'll see that was very, very important for us to have that liberty. And when you start eliminating people's faith from their rights, which you can't ultimately anyways, but when they can try to use the legal frame to manipulate people, that's not good for a society. When they remove your speech and your faith, then your freedom to protest is right in that bag as far as I'm concerned. So I just wanted to make you aware of this. Contact the people that you need to contact. on a personal level, and the people who represent you, and let them know that this is not okay with you. It's just a suggestion. I put it out there for you. I hope this message finds you well and informs you. And in the meantime, guys, thanks so much for listening. Grace and peace.